You're listening to Sunday Service, a live stream of the Grad School Confessional podcast, where we rant about the inner workings of the ivory tower of academia in a mildly qualified way. I'm your host, Dr. Yo Sway, and I'm joined by my co-host, Anna Sway. We were going to make this a live stream, but my internet is actually so crap, so this is now just going to be an episode or a video that we're going to post later. Also, cool fact, we just passed 3,500 followers today, so go us. Today's topic, we're going to be discussing legitimacy and credibility within academia. And I think this is a topic that first came to me after I read someone's sort of tweet. And they had said, I don't really know whether to call myself a researcher or like a social scientist. And it got me thinking there's not really a lot of standardization in the way that we have titles or like talk about research and titles in academia and establish that credibility. But I think you have some fairly strong opinions on this.
Fairly strong. I feel like Twitter is a goldmine for this. Two things stand out.
Yeah.
One, I came across a Twitter profile where someone was calling themselves a neuroscientist. And I found that really strange because usually people will like list their affiliation too to just kind of like add that credibility. And also, they look like they were 14. And I mean, you're on the internet. Nobody can tell you're a dog, whatever. But I went and I double checked, and this person had a general science undergraduate.
Mhm.
So, not like a specialized
General science.
general science. And they didn't have a PhD. They worked as a research assistant in a neuroscience lab.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, 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 that doesn't make you a neuroscientist.
Yeah.
See, in Canada, if you're working at a research institute and basically if you're doing research outside of the academy, the title scientist is an actual job title. So, there's junior scientists and there are senior scientists. And that's an actual job that somebody will be looking to fill. And a prerequisite to holding that job is a doctorate in
Mhm.
that field. And so, at least in Canada, for someone to go and say, I'm a neuroscientist without holding a doctorate is a little misleading.
Right.
And the second thing that came to me from Twitter was a video of a woman, black scholar, who kept being referred to by her first name on a Zoom call by a middle-aged white academic after she repeatedly corrected him and said, "I am like call me doctor,"
Yeah.
her last name, and he repeatedly called her by her first name, and the comments were like, "She's not a doctor, she's just a woman with a PhD." And I was like, "No, we were here first."
Wow. Wow. I mean, so many things to unpack there. Like, first of all, I love this idea of scientist as being a protected title. I think to an extent, if we're having this rhetoric right now, in our social discourse of trust the science, of, science is important, science is whatever, we need to standardize the way in which people establish that authority and that credibility, right?
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong, okay? This is gonna sound like I hate kids, and I don't hate kids. But when like young people are like, "Oh my gosh, I learned about this," or I made a baking soda volcano. I'm a scientist. Like, yeah, you're doing science, but I don't think that makes you a
Oh,
scientist.
okay. And so you said this, and I was like, well, if, little kids are playing in a box or whatever, and they're like, I'm an astronaut and whatever, like, would I actually correct them? Would I actually go to a kid?
Okay,
No, 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 no,
okay.
no. Follow me, follow me,
Yeah,
follow
yeah,
me
yeah.
on this. Would I actually go to a kid and say, well, you haven't gone through decades of rigorous training with NASA, so you're not a scientist. But the reason I think the term scientist needs to be unpacked now and legitimized is because it has become so politicized in
Mhm.
the past 10 years. Sorry, 10. In the past 2 years, it feels like 10 years, but it's only been two. Can you believe that?
Oh my god.
Right? Because,
Doug's having some dream.
okay. Our dog is having a nightmare making sounds that he's never made before. It's a little terrifying.
Anyway.
But in the past 2 years, the terms scientists, the terms research have become so politicized
Mhm.
because you have people going, I've done my own research, and people who do research as a job are just ripping their hair
Yeah,
out.
it's like if you had to use a Google search to find, and that was the extent of the research that you did.
Asterisk, not Google Scholar, because I
Yeah.
use Google Scholar.
Yeah, and like, okay, wait, don't get me wrong, okay? I think using Google is totally fine. It can be a valuable and powerful research tool, but you have like there's another layer involved, right? And that's that critical appraisal piece.
Mhm.
And like that to me is formed through the training that you go through as, a doctorate, right? And you're doing research and you're able to appraise this kind of stuff. It's why I think it's incredibly important in all research methods classes to be teaching a lecture on critical appraisal of research, right? But beyond all of that, we have, I think, most recently, like you mentioned, the term scientist has had this weight to it, right? That started to mean something, or in many ways, delegitimize science, right? Because everyone calls himself a scientist now. Like,
Uh,
what does it even mean to have a PhD?
Right. And then you also have people who have PhDs start to come forth and spread a lot of misinformation
Hmm.
or directly question um, and try to delegitimize like the good work that some people are doing. And it's problematic because they're kind of like they're ruining it for the rest of us.
Yeah, and I think too, it doesn't, this kind of thing hasn't been happening in just academia. Like you look at people like Dr. Phil and Dr. Oz, and they have like Dr. Oz has a medical degree, but he oversteps his bounds
Oh,
so much
absolutely.
in what his expertise is, right? And it's kind of like you're starting to use your degree as a tool by which you can establish authority in something that you honestly shouldn't have the authority in. Like I think if more people understood that having a doctorate means you know a lot about a very small segment of knowledge, they would look at that and be like, oh, wow, that person is a chartered accountant. I bet they know tons about investing in the stock market. Like, they're related, but they're
Yeah.
different, right?
Yeah, it makes no sense. And also, like, it's such a small sliver. And if you just finished your doctorate, you know a lot, but you also, like, you don't know everything.
Hmm.
And I feel like,
Does anybody know everything, though? Like,
no,
yeah,
no, but some people just have so little shame
yeah.
in like positioning. That's like, I don't know. That's like me going into and teaching like a feminist methodologies course because I use feminist methodologies like to do my doctorate. It's like, well, it was a very specific method
Hmm.
and I did it for 3 years. I'm not going to go out and pretend I'm an expert.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at the same time, too, I think when academics take that attitude, right, we almost have this um, apprehension and really considering ourselves an expert in anything, right?
Mm.
And when you combine that with the other side, where people who obviously know much less are now establishing themselves as strong authorities, you have this perfect storm of like, well, if people with doctorates aren't going to stand up and aren't going to be like, hey, I know my crap about this topic, and you have people who are like, I also know it, but they clearly don't have the education, who are people going to believe, right?
The loudest person.
Exactly. We tend to believe the loudest person because hey, they wouldn't be that confident if they didn't know their stuff, right? Like
Hmm.
yeah, and I think it plays into this whole thing we're talking about where it delegitimizes so much, or I guess removes the credibility that PhDs have, right?
Yeah. And I think universities can do a lot more to add credibility to their PhDs or to support their
What do you
PhDs
mean by that?
or to denounce like U of D didn't get Jordan Peterson to leave until he started with like the anti-vax stuff. Like before that,
Yeah.
the sexist, the racist, the classist remarks, U of T was like, that's fine because he published a book. He's bringing in a lot of money. Like, keep him around. And it was the anti vax stuff. And that was when he got like massively called out for that.
Hmm.
That U of T went, I guess now it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Right. But if you are this like sensationalized personality in a way and you're affiliated with an institution, and it's not all bad, like the institution is not going to go out of their way to like, kick you out. They didn't even kick him out.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I know. And one thing that kind of I think you raise a really good point in terms of how universities play a large role in legitimizing these people as well.
Mhm.
Because, obviously the universities as an institutional body are seen as being these like paragons of,
Of
virtue and knowledge. Like there's a reason we call it the ivory tower, right? It's because all the academics live in it and they're like looking down at everyone else and like, we know so much more than you. And when you have
Also, we
people
can't leave. Nobody lets us leave. We're trapped.
also when you're like you're crying out to the townsfolk from the ivory tower and you're like, this is truth and this is good and this is whatever, and the institution's like, yeah, okay, we'll keep you here. There's obviously a level of credibility and legitimacy that comes with that,
It's my
right?
favorite fairy tale, the academic in the ivory tower who opened the shutters to his window and screamed, I am well within my confidence interval. And the town folks were like, yeah, it's pretty dope. Tim knows his stuff.
Oh man.
No, but back to people calling themselves whatever. Like I have an undergrad which was weirdly split between psych and neuro classes.
Hmm.
I'm not going to go and call myself a psychologist, and
Hmm.
I'm not going to go and call myself a neuroscientist because I know like I still can't name the 12 cranial nerves. It's a hard mnemonic.
Yeah, man. I don't even want to look at that. Okay, so then, um, what would you suggest then as being an alternative title for someone like that? So the person in your first example, you said they were a neuroscience research assistant.
Yeah, so just like
Would you consider them a neuroscience researcher?
I don't know. Like if you why is it and this is like a whole other thing, but like why is it that you feel the need to inflate your title? Why can't you be
Oh, come
transparent?
on. Everyone does that though.
But just call it what it is.
Yeah.
You are a research assistant in a neuroscience lab. There's nothing like that is not a thing to be ashamed of.
But I think it's less about shame and more about, again, establishing credibility. Like, for example,
But that's what you are. You have an undergrad degree.
right, but when, let's say they're trying to make a point, okay? Let's say you're trying to like argue with someone on the internet, which is always a good idea. I would recommend it. Um, if you say that you are a neuroscientist versus if you say that you are a neuroscience research assistant, you know, even if on your end you know that it's still a very legitimate thing, hearing that it's like okay, I'll give you another example, right? When you first get a job at a university as a professor, you are a what?
I don't know, depends on the states or in Canada.
Okay, but like what's your title?
If you're tenure track assistant.
Assistant professor, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Assistant
Assistant to
professor.
the regional professor.
Assistant branch professor. Anyway, you are an assistant professor. And to people who are not within academia, and actually even me when I first entered graduate school, I was
Like,
like,
who are you
is that
assisting?
just a TA? Like you're an assistant professor. Like you assist the
Yeah.
professor, right? And so it sounds so much like less legitimate despite us knowing what it is and being like, oh yeah, you just like it's the lowest form of professor. I shouldn't say lowest, but you know what I mean, like
It's
entry.
like
It's
you got
entry
a
level
tenure track
professor.
position. Yeah.
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 Right. And so, I understand why people would want to give themselves sort of like a title that they feel reflects their knowledge and their education.
Okay. Okay. But this is my thing. That's a little bit on the institutions on like not being clear about these things mean. Because when someone is like, I'm a resident at this hospital, nobody goes, oh, so you live there. I mean, they technically do. I understand now why it's called a residency because you never leave the goddamn hospital.
Yeah.
But no, we're not like, oh, so do you live? Do we send postcards to the hospital now? You really should. Anyway,
But like assistant, even of itself, like in other titles, assistant means assistant.
well, then universities need to change it. They're like professor level one.
Professor level
And then
one.
when you get a full professorship,
Yeah, like Super Saiyan professor.
I
And then
literally was going to say that.
same brain.
Same brain. No, but I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can call yourself a type of scientist because then at the same time you have these people who are like I did my research I did my own research and they call themselves a scientist. And
Yeah.
you're like,
Yeah. Or I love people, one of my favorite titles is people who are like, they're they call themselves historians to the like a current event. It's like, no, man, you're not a historian to this current event.
you're an
Like
internet troll.
you're just living in it right now. Okay, just because you know what happened doesn't make you a historian. Like there's another layer of analysis that needs to come. Many more.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but okay. So then obviously there are some. I don't want to say protected, but standardized titles, right? Like doctor kind of infers that you have a PhD or other medical degree. And then,
Or a chiropractor degree. That's
yeah,
another
actually,
thing.
doctor kind of even then kind of gets thrown around. Like, because technically in Canada, lawyers are doctors, right? They're JDs, Juris Doctorates. So,
Yeah, but they have the decency not to call themselves that. But like so are dentists and
I
chiropractors.
think dentists are doctors. You don't think dentists are doctors?
I guess.
Wow, are we ready to get a flame war here?
But chiropractors and chiropractors are gonna come after me. But like you didn't go to
I think also chiropractor gets like a bad rap because of a lot of chiropractors. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Well, I think professor in and of itself is also a protected term, right?
yeah.
And like I remember when I was teaching the class in my undergrad, or sorry, teaching the undergrad class in my doctorate, and I had students calling me professor and calling me doctor, and I corrected them. I was like, actually, I'm neither a professor nor a doctor. I'm
No.
just poorly paid and have been taken advantage of to teach this class. But yeah, and kind of telling them like you can actually just call me by my first name. Like I don't need a mister, I don't need a whatever. And so yeah, like I think professor is one of those things where that's kind of a way to distinguish.
Yeah. But then everything.
So do you think there needs to be something similar for like science? Not like a doctor, but like for example, to be considered a scientist, if you need a doctorate, shouldn't you just be doctor this? Like if you don't have the doctor, then you can't really call yourself a scientist.
Maybe. But then people are gonna say that I'm gatekeeping. But then you're like,
But like I think there's some
science
things,
is a
yeah.
highly technical skill. Maybe we should gatekeep it a little bit.
Yeah, and like you don't feel like people being like, "Oh, like you call yourselves a lawyer, right?" Like you're saying that just because I have legal knowledge doesn't mean I can't call myself a lawyer. Like that's
Yeah,
exactly
that's
it. And it's within, and I think because it pertains to legal matters, right? There's much clearer boundaries in what you can and cannot call yourself and do versus again, science and academia kind of feels a bit like the Wild West right now.
it does. And like for context, I wouldn't call myself a scientist. I wouldn't. I'd call myself a
I
researcher
wouldn't either. Just kidding. Just kidding. I love you.
because I think I do research, but science in of itself has um a set of rules that we
A particular
follow.
set of skills.
No, but it's in terms of it has to speak to like replication. It has to speak to hypothesis formation, all of these different things.
Hmm.
And we don't do that in qualitative research.
Hmm.
It's research, it's incredibly valuable research, but I wouldn't say it's science.
Okay, but then also counterpoint. What about a social scientist? Because those are absolutely a thing.
Oh my God. That's that part of the Venn diagram where I just like don't want to go.
What? It is.
I don't know. I don't know nearly enough about social scientists. Social scientists, tell me, are you scientists or are you social?
Oh, so you think that the scientist term has to come with the social part? Like you can't just be a scientist on your own. You have to be specifically a social scientist.
I don't even know, man.
Okay. All right.
Social science is its own like.
Yeah. I want to talk about something else now for a second. I want to go back to the second example that you gave at the
Mhm.
beginning about, the black scholar who was continually called, sort of the wrong title. And then, comments being like, oh, she's just a woman with a PhD. I think that there is absolutely, for certain groups, I think women especially, this, whether intentional or not, delegitimization of their education, of their expertise.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, as a woman, if you can speak to that.
Um, I think I think in relation to this example, there are so many things happening.
Hmm.
And I think race is a huge component of it. I think um, gender is a huge component of it. I think and I don't know if the person mislabeling the scholar was like a higher standing professor or who they were in that sense. But there are so many issues with that. I think it boils down to like if the person corrects you not once but
Yeah.
twice and says that they're a doctor and this is not a you passing on the street. This is
Yeah.
a formalized like Zoom
Yeah.
talk.
Where, like, it means something, like, it plays a role into, again, that what we talked about, that authority and that
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, then you call them doctor.
I think too, it's like if you were to use that same example, but instead of getting their title wrong, you got their name wrong or you got their gender wrong, like people would look at that and be like, "Wow, that MC or that facilitator was like doing a really bad job."
Yeah.
Right? But here it's almost like, "Oh, well, it seems fine because it's I don't know, it's a PhD, right? Like what do they really
Yeah.
know?"
But I think and I mean there's a lot of conversations on Twitter happening about how um it means a lot more for women to be referred to as
Mhm.
they will set a precedent to be called Dr. So and so because people in the academy keep defaulting to like their first name
Mhm.
or to Miss, Mrs. whatever,
Yeah.
right? And it's this the infantilization of women in academia is like very deeply entrenched.
Mhm. And also, I've heard too that part of the reason why, they insist on doctor is because it's the only title they get what doesn't infer their marital status.
Yeah.
Like men don't get that, right? Like Mr. What's the Mr. Like, basically it's just you
Mr.
don't know whether
Doctor.
I'm Mr. Doctor. It's
Um,
strange. Well, maybe. Who am I to judge?
this is what we do. We just quote movies and you can guess which movie that's coming from.
But yeah, like I don't have to worry about that. Not that I would, I think, even be worried about it. But certainly, if I'm talking to someone in a job interview, they can't ask me if I'm married. But
I
if
mean,
they,
they can't ask me if I'm married.
right, but they might infer from, the way, like, let's say you don't have your doctorate yet, right? And they're
Mhm.
like, how should we address you? Right. And your choices in a fill form for a job application are like Miss or Mrs. Like right away, that basically more or less gives it away, right?
Yeah. And that's in itself like why?
I mean, I think it comes back to a time where we, I mean, again, this is just my speculation, but where women were kind of viewed as more property than anything else. Like,
Right. No, and I agree. But then why do we still have these? Because like it's kind of interesting because there's tons of like non-binary folks exist,
yeah.
right? Or people who just like people who don't get married, people who don't like at this point, somebody who is widowed is a very different person from someone who hasn't been married yet. So
Mhm.
like should we have a category for everything? Like just don't have those things
Mhm.
unless they're professional like designations. Then you put it down like PhD,
Mhm.
MD, JD, whatever.
Mhm.
But it doesn't really help the people doing the hiring, whether it's Mrs.,
Yeah.
Mr.
Except unless to, sort of subtly discriminate, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if it's there for that, then like
Yeah.
maybe maybe stop discriminating. It'll help you.
Yeah. I want to talk about something in the kind of the opposite direction of this now, where it's like we've talked about how these titles kind of can be used to discriminate, to categorize, but then we have the other side of things where people kind of like will just put this on everything, right? And they'll use it to their advantage. Kind of we talked about like Dr. Oz, Dr. Phil.
Mhm.
Do you think there's situations in which calling yourself a doctor as a PhD is probably not a good idea? Or like is kind of almost self-serving in a way beyond any use or any utility.
I mean, there's always utility, right? You're kind of
Okay, what about the classic airplane example though, where you're like, "Is there a doctor on board?" And you're like, "I'm a doctor. This man's dying." It's like, "Oh, no, no, not that kind of doctor."
that's but that's what I mean, right? It's self-serving in the sense that it creates this illusion that you're allowed to speak to matters that are way
Yeah.
outside of your expertise. And for a lot of these topics, you're probably like, you are a lay person.
Yeah.
Like, you are the general public.
Yeah.
We kind of have this assumption that because somebody's smart or somebody has a credential in like a specific thing, that they're just uniformly like, I don't know, intelligent or
Yeah.
knowledgeable.
Yeah.
But, like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Like, Jordan Peterson has a PhD in psych, and not, like, as a practicing psychologist,
Yeah.
like, as a researcher, and that's cool, but maybe we shouldn't take his advice on global pandemics
Yeah.
because he's never researched them, and until COVID came up, has probably never even, like, taken an interest in them.
Yeah. And also too, like, um, sorry, I lost my train of thought here. We were talking about titles? Yeah.
People having an expertise in a narrow field, and we're extrapolating that they'll have an expertise in.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, I know what I was gonna say. So, yeah, I think it's really interesting because that's actually a fallacy. It's called ad hominem, right? And it's
Mhm.
where we expect someone to be knowledgeable or to be telling the truth about something or to be good at something simply because they occupy a high position or a reputable position. And I think a fantastic example of this is any celebrity ever. Like
Oh my
celebrity workouts, celebrity like giving you advice on love life or your lifestyle, like just don't do it. These people aren't you. They don't know your thing, right? They barely know what it's like to just exist as a person. Like no person should have that many people throng to them, right? It's kind of weird that we idolize them. But I think it's the same thing with like academics. It's like, oh, you're a PhD, you know this. You must know all this other stuff. And my parents do this all the time.
I was just going to say, this is the
This
universal
is this is
immigrant
the
child
immigrant experience, right?
experience.
It's like your parents are like, "Oh, you got a PhD in health sciences," which technically I suppose the broader umbrella of health science. Yes, I did.
Guess mom.
Right? But then like, help me with this thing or like what does this medication mean? I'm like, I have never taken a psychopharmacology course or a pharmacology course in general, right? And so like I don't know what a lot of these things are. I'm just inferring. That's not to say that I'm useless. Like I think as a researcher, the ability to go on and research and try and find out about this stuff, like that
Yeah.
is useful. And being able to read the science, that is useful.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to be like, yeah, I'm an expert in this. Listen to what I say. Take it as gospel.
Yeah. So my parents will take it like an extra step. And it's mostly with like language acquisition. And I remember being a kid and like having better English than my parents. And they would ask me like finance questions because they were asked it in English. And since I could comprehend the question better, I could, in theory, generate
Ah,
knowledge.
yes, finance. Now that's part of
And
my.
the argument of like, "But you speak English," was used so many times. And I was like, "But I'm 12." So, yeah, I think it's the quintessential immigrant experience.
Yeah.
Or like, the moment you know the language better than your parents, or the moment you get a PhD, they're just like, "Well, you must know everything.
Yeah.
Figure it out."
Yeah, exactly. And I think again, it's not just exclusive to your parents. Like I think the general public thinks the same thing or feels the same way. It's like you have a PhD and it's like you need look no further than into popular media. And like I think there's one Avengers movie where Bruce Banner was like, I have 4 PhDs or something.
5
Five
PhDs.
PhDs.
And
It's
every
like,
academic.
why?
What
Why
happened?
would you do 5 PhDs?
Okay, my theory is
They're
that
not the Infinity Stones, man. You don't gotta collect all of them.
you don't get stronger.
Yeah,
They just chip
you just
away.
get poorer and sadder.
They just chip away at your sanity, Bruce. Come on. I think he just didn't want to enter the real world and just kept getting funding and
Yeah.
just stuck around. But even the funding's not that good.
Yeah.
It makes sense why in the first Avengers movie they find him. Black Widow finds him in a hut in the middle of nowhere. That's all the man can afford.
Yeah. And then it's like, I tried to kill myself. Like, I would too, man.
If I had 5 PhDs,
If I had to do 5 PhDs, oh my gosh.
20 years of your life.
I'm kidding. We don't endorse suicide. But yeah, like again, it's just you look at depictions of what a
Yeah.
PhD is, and it's like you just must know everything about this thing, right? And I think if academia was a bit more transparent about what that actually means, people would look at that and be like, oh, yeah, you just know a lot about maybe one particular thing. You know a lot about your thesis.
Yeah.
And also, really interesting too, is like we position PhDs as being, oh, you know all this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's training. Like you're being trained in a thing, right? You wouldn't look at an apprentice of, I don't know, welding, right?
Yeah.
And they do like a 4-year apprenticeship, let's say. You wouldn't look at that person and be like, wow, you're a master welder now. It's like no, the person's good and they can work like weld on their own, but it still takes years of training, years of continued work and practice to become a master welder, for
Hmm.
example, right? And I think it's the very same with like research. Like I am continually learning more and more about research, often to my detriment.
I'm continually learning about all the things I'm doing wrong.
Yeah, but anyway, I think it's been a very fruitful discussion about sort of the credibility that academics have and the legitimacy of a lot of these different degrees.
Yes, and I also want to settle the age-old debate. Um, you can't call yourself a candidate unless you did a candidacy.
Yeah, yeah, that's one thing too. It's like I see people posting that they, oh, I just got into a PhD program. I'm a PhD candidate now. It's like,
No, you're not.
well, and see, here's the thing, and here's why I think it's confusing. Candidate has a meaning to it. Assistant professor, the assistant part kind of doesn't. Like it doesn't mean assistant.
Yeah.
So, again, I think it's just.
Academia, surprise, surprise, academia is horribly disorganized.
And you know what, too? I think, too, one of the issues with this whole, like, oh, a PhD is this and that. Like, dude, I have known so many PhDs, and if people have done PhDs, right? Just through my graduate degree and whatever. There is no consistency at all in what constitutes a PhD program at all. You could do one study, you could do 3 studies, you could do 5 studies, and also the defense. Like depending on who you're on defense committee,
Yeah.
it could be a complete joke.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting, especially with defense committees, that I hear um I hear about people's defenses and how they were grilled on their research. And then I've seen people's defenses where the people were like tangentially related to the field. And the reason they were on this defense committee is because they had a service component they needed to meet. And it was August and all the other academics were on vacation. Like it's just the chasm
Mm-hmm.
in
There's
be-
such a divide in between like what constitutes a PhD program. Yeah.
yeah. And I don't know. I think it's a little more standardized in, I mean, the more STEM you get,
Mm-hmm.
but in health sciences, in life sciences, it's kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this feels like enough for a PhD,
Yeah.
I
I
guess.
mean, to some universities' credit, like, when we were having that crossover episode with the struggling scientists, they were
Mhm.
saying in Europe, at their university, you have to publish at least 2 of your papers and have one in in submission,
Yeah.
right? To move to your defense even. And I
Yeah.
think, that's a fair step into kind of standardizing part of the PhD program. That said, though, they were in a STEM field. It's the kind of thing that you have, are more likely to do in that kind of field. You make that contribution. When you look at fields that are more social science or, involve maybe special populations or whatever, like
Mhm.
a number doesn't really cut it. And so I think for me personally, the idea of somehow a standardized way to evaluate a contribution to your field doesn't, like, not necessarily studies, like number of studies, but
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that in itself,
I mean,
that
that's
in
what your
its,
thesis is supposed to be, right?
I
But
mean,
who
it's
reads
a
it?
caveat too, right? Because like some people are just really good at justifying their work.
Hmm.
Some people aren't. I'm not. But also, like, how do you even standardize contribution to your field?
Sorry, I don't mean standardized contribution to your. I mean more of like s- the whole PhD itself needs to have a standardized component of something related to a contribution to the field.
Yeah. I mean, again, some people would argue that even if all you did was replicate a few studies,
Yeah,
it
yeah, that's
makes
fair.
a significant contribution to the field.
But I think, okay, and so this leads me to an interesting point because you had mentioned like, oh, I'm not very good at justifying like the importance of my work.
Yeah.
I think it is an essential component of a PhD, of occupying an authority of knowledge to be able to justify the importance of your work, or at the very least, where it fits into everything. And I think that because people out there without PhDs, without degrees, are going around and spouting nonsense about whatever it is and are justifying its importance. And I think, it's almost a responsibility of people who know better and who hold that knowledge to be like, this is how it actually is.
So glad we managed to make this personal.
Yeah.
Me as I'm writing my thesis up. I'm so glad we made this personal. No, I mean, I know the contribution that my research makes. I just have trouble positioning it like some people talk about their research and it's like this is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And I can't do that because
Right.
like even within my project there are different analytic products where I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, this is definitely more important than this other thing,
Yeah.
and certain things take priority. Um so I can't be like,
So maybe importance is the wrong word here. I think I mean more like understanding how to position your work within the broader context of just everything,
that's
right?
good grant writing. That's what that
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Yeah. And to that point, I think regardless of what level of education you end up getting, whether it's a master's or a PhD into graduate school, knowledge brokerage is a hugely important part of it, right? Just being
Yes.
able to look at a research paper, you don't have to write it, but being able to look at something in your field, in your relative expertise, and be able to critically appraise it and then be able to translate that to people who, wouldn't be able to do that, speak the language of science. I think that's hugely important. And I think can only contribute to a more informed population. So, I think maybe having a position, having formalized maybe even like a protected title of a knowledge broker, right?
And yeah, and some universities are starting to employ people specifically for those positions,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is a good start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we need more knowledge brokers.
But also with other positions, like don't don't overstate
Yeah.
your credentials because in the short run, it might help you win an argument, but in the long run, you are compromising what people are trying to, spend a large chunk of their lives building,
Mm-hmm.
and you're further adding to
Mm-hmm.
this,
Yeah.
you know,
Being aware of the power of your platform, right? And like,
yeah, and
but then also I think too, not understating the importance and
mhm,
or like the authority and knowledge that you may carry,
yeah.
right? Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to Sunday Service, the live stream. Well, not today, but of Grad School Confessional. Special thanks to my lovely co-host Anna. If you missed this one, tune in every other Sunday on twitch.tv/gradschoolconfessional at 9 a.m. PST for the next one. And you can also listen to each live stream episode on our YouTube channel or anywhere you listen to our podcast. If you haven't already, leave us a rating on Spotify, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and give us a follow on Twitter @GradConfessing. And until next time, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Principal Investigator, amen.